Isaac Levitan. 1. Above the Eternal Tranquility, 1894. They say Isaac Levitan once confessed to a friend that a man's true soul can only be seen in silence. Not in words, not in deeds, but in that stillness that terrifies us. And it was in that silence, in 1894, that he created one of the most haunting landscapes in Russian art. Above the Eternal Tranquility. Creation and State of Mind. Levitan was in his 30s, already ill with the heart condition that would cut his life short. He wandered the countryside near the Volga River, feeling both awe and despair. He was a man obsessed with eternity, with death, and with the fleeting beauty of existence. His friends remembered him sitting alone for hours, staring at the horizon, whispering to himself. In this state of contemplation, almost fevered by his own thoughts, Levitan painted a vision that seemed less like earth and more like a threshold to another world. Artistic process. Look at the painting. A vast, almost infinite sky, heavy with rolling clouds that seem to press upon the earth. Below, a calm, dark lake stretches endlessly, mirroring the heavens above. On the far shore, a small, lonely church with a spire pointing upward, dwarfed by the immensity of nature. The brushwork is slow, deliberate, heavy with atmosphere. The palette, somber blues, deep grays, muted greens. Levitan abandoned all decorative detail. Every stroke is a breath of silence, a weight of stillness. Historical and social context. The late 19th century in Russia was marked by turbulence. Industrial progress on one side, but also deep unrest, poverty, and a restless spiritual search. Artists like Levitan and writers like Tolstoy and Dostoevsky grappled with questions of existence, faith, and mortality. Levitan, a Jew in a country that often rejected him, carried an inner exile. In Above the Eternal Tranquility, he gave Russia not an idyllic landscape but a mirror of its soul, heavy, searching, yearning for meaning. Symbolism and interpretation. The lake is time, endless, unbroken. The church is faith, fragile, small, yet reaching upward. The sky is eternity, vast, overwhelming, indifferent. Levitan places humanity's spiritual symbols as tiny against the infinite cosmos. Some see the work as religious, others as deeply existential. It is both a hymn and a lament. Man is here, but the eternal silence surrounds him. Reception and legacy. When the painting was first exhibited, critics were stunned. Some said it was too bleak, too suffocating, not a landscape, but a sermon. Yet others whispered that Levitan had touched something untouchable, the metaphysical essence of existence. Over time, Above the Eternal Tranquility became not just one of Levitan's masterpieces, but a cornerstone of Russian cultural identity. It is a painting that cannot be simply looked at. It must be endured, experienced, absorbed. Poetic closing. Stand before this painting long enough and you will feel your heartbeat slow. The silence in the work begins to echo with your own silence. Levitan once wrote that in nature he felt the terrifying beauty of eternity. In Above the Eternal Tranquility he offered us eternity itself, vast, unanswering yet achingly beautiful. Lake 1890s. Imagine standing before a still body of water, its surface glass-like, reflecting the vastness of the sky. But as you stare, you realize it is not peace you feel, but an unsettling awareness, that the lake hides secrets, depths unseen, silence that could drown you. This is the power of Isaac Levitan's Lake, a painting not just of nature but of the human soul. Creation and State of Mind. The 1890s were a turning point for Levitan. His health was declining, yet his artistic vision was reaching its peak. He had traveled across Russia, sketching rivers, forests, and remote villages. But in the solitude of loch shores, he found something that resonated with his own restless heart, the tension between serenity and despair. Levitan once told a fellow artist, "Water is life and death together. It gives, it takes, it mirrors." In Lake he poured this duality into pigment. Artistic process. At first glance, the composition is disarmingly simple. A lake, a sky, a thin strip of land. But Levitan orchestrates every detail to create mood rather than description. The water stretches wide, shimmering with pale reflections of cloud and sky. The horizon is low, emphasizing the immensity of air above. The brushstrokes are broad and confident, dissolving detail into atmosphere. Soft transitions of blues and silvers dominate the canvas, punctuated by faint greens and earthy tones at the edges. Levitan does not paint objects. He paints feelings. The lake is not just a body of water, it is an emotion suspended on canvas. Historical and social context. This was the time when Russian culture wrestled with questions of identity. The countryside, lakes, forests, meadows, was no mere backdrop. For writers and painters alike, the landscape became a symbol of the nation's soul. Tolstoy sought truth in the simplicity of peasants. Chekhov wrote of quiet desperation beneath everyday life. Levitan's lake echoed these themes. It was not a portrait of a specific site but an essence, a distilled moment that spoke to every Russian who had ever stood before the mystery of water and sky. Symbolism and interpretation. What lies in the calm of a lake? For some, it is peace, reflection, a mirror of heaven. For Levitan it was also melancholy, infinity, and the fragility of life. The still surface suggests silence, but silence in Levitan is never gentle. It presses on the viewer like a weight. The blurred horizon between sky and water becomes a metaphor for the blurred line between life and death, the known and the unknowable. And yet, within this sadness there is also beauty, a beauty that saves even as it hurts. Reception and legacy. When Lake was first shown, it did not provoke scandal or debate like some of his darker works. Instead, it quietly entered the hearts of viewers. People wrote that standing before it felt like standing at the edge of their own memories, of childhood summers and forgotten evenings. Over time, critics hailed Lake as one of Levitan's purest achievements, not a dramatic sermon, but a meditation distilled into light and air. It became one of those paintings that transcends its era, timeless, universal, eternal. Poetic closing. The surface of a lake is always deceptive. It shows you the sky but it hides the depths. Levitan understood this better than anyone. In Lake he gave us more than a view of water. He gave us the haunting truth of existence, that beauty and sorrow are inseparable, and that even silence is filled with echoes. Twilight, 1899. There is a moment in the evening when the world holds its breath. The sun has gone, but night has not yet claimed the earth. Shadows lengthen, colors fade, and silence deepens. It is in this fragile pause, between light and darkness, between hope and despair, that Isaac Levitan painted Twilight. A canvas where time itself seems suspended, and where mortality whispers through every brushstroke. Creation and state of mind. By 1899, Levitan was living under the shadow of illness. He knew his heart was failing, and death was no longer a distant abstraction but a constant presence in his studio. Friends recalled that he worked feverishly as though each painting might be his last. In Twilight we see this urgency. It was not painted for recognition, nor for patronage. It was painted as an intimate confession, a final prayer whispered to the vast Russian evening. Artistic process. The scene is deceptively simple, a quiet field or riverbank dissolving into shadow, a horizon tinged with the last faint glow of the day. But Levitan handles the paint like a poet choosing words, sparingly, yet with profound resonance. The palette is restrained, muted violets, smoky blues, soft ochres fading into gray. His brushstrokes are loose, merging forms into atmosphere, erasing boundaries between earth and sky. He does not describe, he evokes. Looking at the painting, one feels not the landscape itself, but the weight of time passing, the inevitability of night. Historical and social context. The late 19th century was a time of anxiety in Russia. The empire stood on the edge of modernity, yet bound by old traditions. Writers like Chekhov and Dostoevsky captured the quiet despair of ordinary lives, while composers like Rachmaninoff gave voice to longing and melancholy. Levitan's Twilight belongs to this same cultural current, the portrayal of inner states through external landscapes. It was not merely a painting of evening, it was a mirror of a nation's mood, of individuals suspended in uncertainty, longing for light yet swallowed by shadow. Symbolism and interpretation. Twilight is never just twilight in Levitan's art. It is a metaphor for transition, for endings, for the delicate line between being and non-being. The fading light becomes the artist's own fading life. The silence becomes the silence he feared would soon envelop him. And yet, there is still beauty. In the dim glow along the horizon, one senses not despair but tenderness. Levitan seems to say, even in endings there is grace. Even in darkness there is meaning. Reception and legacy. When Twilight was first exhibited, critics admired its subtlety but often overlooked its depth. Some called it merely atmospheric, missing the confessional intensity that pulsed beneath. But as the years passed, the painting grew in significance. Today, art historians see Twilight as one of Levitan's most personal works, a visual diary of a man confronting mortality. It has become a symbol not just of an artist's struggle, but of the universal human condition, that fragile awareness we all carry, that life is beautiful precisely because it ends. Poetic closing. Twilight is not a time of day. It is a state of being. Levitan knew this and he gave it form on canvas. In his Twilight, the last light clings to the horizon like a memory refusing to die. The shadows advance, yet the sky still glows. It is a reminder that even as darkness falls, the echo of light remains. Twilight. Haystacks, 1899. Imagine a field at dusk. The day's labor has ended, the workers gone, and the haystacks stand like silent guardians of the earth. But in Isaac Levitan's Twilight, haystacks, these simple mounds of grass become something more, monuments to time itself. They are not just haystacks, they are echoes of human toil, witnesses to the fleeting glow of light before night devours the world. And in them, Levitan poured both his gratitude for life and his fear of its approaching end. Creation and emotional state. Levitan painted this work in the final years of his life, when every brushstroke carried the weight of mortality. His heart condition had worsened, leaving him in near constant weakness, but he refused to stop painting. For him, every landscape was a conversation with eternity. In Twilight. Haystacks, he returned to the rural fields of Russia that had shaped his vision since childhood. He saw in them both permanence and fragility, the cycle of seasons, the certainty of harvest, but also the inevitability of decay. Artistic process. At first glance, the painting is quiet, haystacks in the fading evening light. But look closer and it becomes almost symphonic. Levitan balances form and emptiness, detail and suggestion. The haystacks are rendered in warm, earthy tones, their rounded shapes glowing faintly as though holding on to the memory of the sun. Around them, the air thickens with twilight blues and purples, blurring contours into atmosphere. His brushwork is economical yet deeply expressive, layering light upon shadow until the canvas itself seems to breathe. Levitan does not merely depict objects. He transforms them into vessels of feeling. The haystacks are no longer agricultural forms, they are presences standing against the vastness of night. Historical and cultural context. In 19th century Russia, haystacks were more than symbols of labor. They represented survival, the rhythm of rural life, and the intimate relationship between humans and the land. For peasants, they were security against the coming winter. For Levitan, they became symbols of endurance in the face of his own decline. The broader cultural moment in Russia, too, was one of uncertainty. Industrialization clashed with old traditions and intellectuals debated the nation's fate. Levitan's landscapes, rooted in simplicity yet steeped in emotion, spoke to this collective unease, a longing for stability in a world that seemed to be changing too quickly. Symbolism and interpretation. Why haystacks? Why twilight? Together they form a meditation on cycles. The haystacks embody the labor of a day, the harvest of a season. Twilight embodies the passage of time, the day ending as life itself edges toward darkness. The painting becomes a metaphor for the human condition. We build, we labor, we leave traces, but all is eventually swallowed by night. And yet, Levitan does not render this truth with bitterness. His twilight is tender, suffused with quiet reverence. The haystacks stand firm, glowing softly against the advancing shadows as if to say, even in impermanence there is dignity. Reception and legacy. When first shown Twilight, Haystacks received modest attention. Many viewers admired its atmosphere but did not recognize its depth. For decades, it was overshadowed by Levitan's more famous works like Above Eternal Peace. But modern audiences have rediscovered its quiet brilliance. Today it is seen as a profound meditation on time and transience, a work that elevates the ordinary into the eternal. In the stillness of the haystacks, viewers across generations find their own reflections, of days ending, of seasons passing, of lives lived and gone. Poetic closing. In Twilight. Haystacks, the field is empty, the workers gone, the light fading. But the haystacks remain, humble, enduring, luminous against the dark. Levitan, facing his own twilight, painted them not as mere objects, but as metaphors for existence itself. Silent, steadfast, fragile, and eternal. And as night falls on the canvas, one feels not despair, but a quiet acceptance. A reminder that even as shadows claim the earth, what we leave behind still glows in the fading light. Spring in Crimea, 1892. There are paintings that feel like memories and there are paintings that feel like dreams. Levitan's Spring in Crimea belongs to the second kind, a vision of awakening where earth and sky breathe together in tender light. But behind its serenity lies a paradox. The artist who so often painted the melancholy of Russian fields, found in Crimea a fleeting glimpse of joy. It was not merely spring he painted, it was hope itself, fragile and trembling, as if he knew it might vanish at any moment. Creation and emotional state. Levitan first visited Crimea in the early 1890s, when his health was faltering. The southern landscapes struck him with their lushness, their vibrancy, their promise of renewal. Unlike the solemn tones of central Russia, here he encountered brightness, almond blossoms, emerald hills, shimmering seas. For a man haunted by illness and inner shadows, Crimea felt like a reprieve. In Spring in Crimea, painted in 1892, he sought to capture that sensation, a world reborn, radiant with possibility. But beneath the surface of joy lay his familiar awareness of transience. For Levitan, even the brightest spring carried the echo of an ending. Artistic process. The canvas glows with clarity. Soft, blossoming trees stretch across the foreground, their branches laden with delicate whites and pinks. Beyond them, rolling hills fade into a misty horizon, where light seems to dissolve into air. Levitan worked with a palette far lighter than usual, tender greens, pastel blossoms, a sky washed in pale blues. His brushstrokes are loose yet precise, creating the impression of shimmering vitality. Unlike the heavy atmosphere of Twilight or Above Eternal Peace, this work breathes with openness. Every stroke feels like an inhalation, a sigh of relief. What's remarkable is his restraint. He does not overwhelm the canvas with detail. Instead, he leaves space, air between branches, silence between forms, so that the viewer feels the expansion of spring itself. The painting is not just seen, it is inhaled like the scent of blossoms on a breeze. Historical and cultural context. In the late 19th century, Crimea held symbolic weight for Russian artists and writers. It was a place of exile and retreat, of healing and inspiration. For Levitan, who carried the heaviness of exile in his Jewish identity and the burden of chronic illness, Crimea represented a temporary liberation. At the same time, Russia itself was restless. Industrialization, social upheaval, and intellectual ferment shook the old certainties. In this tension, Spring in Crimea stood as a counterpoint, a vision of stillness and rebirth, as though Levitan longed to preserve one pure, untouched corner of existence. Symbolism and interpretation. The symbolism of spring is universal: rebirth, hope, renewal. But in Levitan's hands, it becomes personal. The blossoming trees stand like fragile souls, beautiful yet vulnerable to the winds of time. The light that bathes the landscape is gentle, almost otherworldly, a symbol of grace. And yet, the horizon with its fading contours reminds us that this vision is fleeting. Spring passes. Blossoms fall. Renewal comes, but it does not erase mortality. Thus, the painting becomes both a celebration and a lament, joy held tenderly in the knowledge that it cannot last forever. Reception and legacy. When Spring in Crimea was first shown, it surprised audiences. Many knew Levitan for his darker, melancholic works, yet here was a canvas of brightness and life. Some critics dismissed it as too idyllic, too simple. But others saw its quiet daring, the way Levitan could hold joy and fragility together in one breath. Over time, it has become a beloved piece of his oeuvre, often seen as evidence of his range, an artist who could capture both sorrow and serenity with equal depth. Today, it resonates deeply in a world that still longs for renewal, for moments of beauty amid uncertainty. Poetic closing. Spring in Crimea is not merely a landscape, it is a prayer whispered in color. In its blossoms we see the trembling beauty of life, in its light we feel the warmth of hope, and in its horizon we sense the mystery of what lies beyond. Levitan, weary yet unbroken, painted it as a testament, that even in a life marked by shadows, there can be moments of radiance. And so the canvas endures, carrying forward the breath of spring, eternal, fragile, and forever new.